Excellent news, David. I believe
Go ahead.
all of our channels have been restored to good standing, so we're going out today to viewers on the Jason Goodman YouTube channel, Crowdsource the Truth 2, and Crowdsource the Truth 3. David, the United States of America is in turmoil unlike anything we've ever seen before. How are you doing there in Canada?
Well, we're watching with fascination the manipulations of what's going on in the United States, particularly the way it's being presented, for example, by the world's leading propagandist, the BBC. And I personally cannot understand how Americans are falling for it. Over to you.
What would you say is the most notable thing you've seen in the BBC about this siege on the Capitol and all the things that have been going on?
Well, there are two stories that the BBC came out with. One that's very germane to our show today, which is, I don't know if I understand the term exactly, but it looks like China has jumped the shark and has decided...
Well, just so that you understand it, jumping the shark comes from a Happy Days episode where the person who coined the phrase felt that the show is really, really good until they had an episode where one of the stars staged a motorcycle stunt where he was going to jump over a shark, and it was so far removed from anything the show was ever about that people thought it was stupid, and after that the show was totally ruined. So jumping the shark is doing something totally stupid that wipes out any cool factor or any goodness you ever had, and you're now a loser.
Well, I think the metaphor extends to what I've got in mind, which is that China's relationship with Canada has basically been a series of incremental steps, primarily with a guy that I believe it was the first overtly treasonous prime minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, where there was a relationship between the communist China and Trudeau that stretches back at the very least to 1973, when Trudeau shook hands with Mao Zedong, probably the greatest killer of the 20th century, and began accelerating a trade in, well, at least defense secrets, Canadian defense secrets, to the communist Chinese. Now, I think the Chinese played it brilliantly with insiders in, let's say, the intellectual elites at these universities such as UBC and Harvard and so on. But when they came out, I think it was in November 2020, in that BBC, the BBC quoted some guy in China as saying that they don't care whether the Five Eyes or 10 Eyes, but if they continue to support the democracy movement in Hong Kong, then their eyes are going to be plucked out. Well,
could be blinded.
Which is consistent with my hope that one day we'll have a series of documentary, Five Eyes Wide Shut, because I think people know about the Eyes Wide Shut movie, and maybe many other people understand that there is a Five Eyes signals intelligence network that has existed extremely well up until or from World War II, until it was undermined by Pierre Trudeau and accelerated by Justin Trudeau. So when in November 2020, China says the Five Eyes could be blinded, that's getting very close to an overt declaration of war, isn't it?
I would say it is. And David, this is an article from just November 19th, 2020. It's a pretty bold threat from China.
It is. Now, in order to, we'll come back during the show today and we'll perhaps discuss, or we will discuss, how China could be emboldened to make that threat, because I think they had manipulated the elites in North America or the Five Eyes countries, and basically knew that the elites had established a backdoor into the Five Eyes signals intelligence network, which I believe was done mostly through technology grown out of, or grown by alumni out of the University of British Columbia. So fast forward.
Sorry, David, help us understand that, because this is an important point for the audience who possibly hasn't seen our shows on subscribestar.com/reverse-CSI, patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, or Subscribestar and Patreon/crowdsource the truth. How is UBC so pivotally involved in allowing China to infiltrate the Five Eyes networks?
Because UBC alumni, and there's one particular guy in particular who I met in 1995. That's the John McDonald, who was an alumnus and on faculty at UBC. And he founded a company called McDonald Detweiler and Associates in 1969, which was a very interesting year because that was the year Bill Clinton was squatting in Moscow, presumably briefing the KGB after getting expelled from Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar for rape. 1969, I believe, was the Days of Rage in Chicago. And 1969 was the first session of the International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence, in which I'm an authority because I've actually built systems. So that was a pivotal year if you decided that you needed to dismantle or start dismantling the protections offered to the citizens through the Five Eyes Signals Intelligence Network that had worked since World War II. So for me, John McDonald is an absolutely pivotal character. He died in 2019, but he would go on to found, well, as I say, he founded McDonald Detweiler, which then got some quite extraordinary contracts. Let me fast forward to 1995.
Wait, real quick, but before we move off of that, what is he doing in this bizarre outfit, David?
Well, that looks like an academic honor society that's put that, that would be an old-fashioned hat that maybe academics or faculty would be wearing back in the 16th century. I don't know. It's some kind of celebration. I don't think it's a ritual. I think it's the kind of uniform that people at university wear. Oh,
it says John McDonald served 2 terms as University of Northern British Columbia Chancellor. He died at age 83 on Boxing Day, David, but luckily not in the ring.
Right. Now, I saw John McDonald in 1995 because I got it cleared from the chief executive officer of Racal Defense Electronics, where I had been developing artificial systems in the UK. And I went to see John McDonald to see if he would be interested in selling the company to Racal, where I could use some of the techniques or technologies developed by McDonald Detweiler in my artificial intelligence work. Now, I always remember, I said, you probably are the same, you pick up odd signals, body language.
Yeah.
This guy would not look me in the eye. He seemed very nervous. Now, in 1995, and looking back, I think I understand the reason, McDonald Detweiler was sold to Orbital Sciences of Dulles, Virginia. Mm-hmm. Now, Orbital Sciences of Dulles, Virginia is a major company from the United States defense point of view because it has the technology to track incoming intercontinental ballistic missiles, which had actually been weaponized to a greater extent by the treason of Bill Clinton, whose organization transferred technology to the communist Chinese that would allow them to put multiple independent re-entry weapons on incoming ballistic missiles.
And David, remember, Wilbur Ross didn't want to speak to me about Serco. He wanted to talk about space.
Well, I bet he did, you see, because I believe so many, you'll have to keep me from going down fascinating rabbit holes, you see, but I believe Wilbur Ross has helped to sabotage the presidency of Donald Trump because Wilbur Ross was the man who provided the investment banking service for the privatization or the Serco, which was highly involved in distributing or controlling patents that would be used by McDonald Detweiler, I think, on 911. So just going back to McDonald Detweiler and John McDonald, in 1995, McDonald Detweiler got a contract to provide training and installation services for a product, a security product called Entrust, which we've learned to love, right? Because Entrust public key infrastructure, then McDonald Detweiler would go around the world through its subsidiary PCS, teaching people in 4 different languages with mobile laboratories how to use Entrust public key infrastructure, which is the back door to the Five Eyes. If you control Entrust public key infrastructure, you have access to the most important node on the Federal Bridge called the MOD Route CCEB. CCEB stands for Combined Communications Electronics Board. That's the same tech, down the bottom there. That's the same terminology as used in World War II.
I want to pause you for 1 second, David, to point something out.
Yeah.
So this diagram, this map, whatever we want to call it, this thing basically describes this Federal Bridge public key infrastructure, the Federal Bridge Certification Authority. I know nothing about this except for what you've told me about it. And there's an individual who is suing me who insists that we've targeted him. But I want to clarify for that individual and for viewers that we just started talking about this. I didn't know who that person was. But the fact that he became so interested in us and putting out information that was false to dissuade people from listening to us, to discredit the types of things that we're talking about with regard to this Federal Bridge diagram and other things, that in and of itself was so conspicuous that it caused us to wonder why this individual would be so adamant about preventing us from talking about this. It just became just so obvious.
Well, they don't have an A team, you see, Jason, right? And I think this gentleman describes himself as an ethical hacker.
That's the one.
Without attributing any malicious forethoughts or intent by this guy, my point would be that if he's an ethical hacker, he can hack into a network like this.
Sorry, if I may, David. I think the point is any ethical hacker, someone doing hacking, could give rise to a penetration, even if it's not that person and it's not their intent. Someone writing about ethical hacking gives rise to the question, could an ethical hacker in general allow this type of penetration and enable China, through Entrust, to take control of all of these critical systems that seem to be somehow linked through this Federal Bridge?
Well, absolutely. So McDonnell Detweiler enabled, I believe, Huawei, right, to hack in to the Federal Bridge and capture, or at least gain access to, the most important node on the Federal Bridge, which is the one down at the bottom, the UK CCEB root key. And what you can do then is you can basically run a parallel narrative or a compromised node attack on any of the nodes on that Federal Bridge, including, for example, Boeing aircraft. So McDonnell Detweiler has a product.
Do you think, David, that the Boeing 737 MAX, and there's a lot of things that have been happening to Boeing that are not good, that can be enabled through the Federal Bridge?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, the McDonnell Detweiler had some technology that it announced on May the 3rd of 2001 called Instrument Approach Procedures, which was a contract from the United States Air Force for a drag and drop interface to an aircraft flying above the skies, let's say on 911, where you can take the plane off its regular en route airway and fly it past various obstacles. The intent was, I presume, as an anti-hijacking measure. But because McDonnell Detweiler's system had been programmed with artificial intelligence algorithms, for example, to avoid collisions in the air, equally, it can avoid interception, which is what happened on 911. Right? So McDonnell Detweiler, John McDonnell, I believe, was a party, wittingly or unwittingly, to standing down or blinding the Five Eyes defense systems, right? Such that these planes flown through artificial intelligence algorithms could get through to their targets or go over the top of the targets and act as a cover for missiles to take out, for example, the Pentagon's US Navy Command Center. And by then, through a hack into Nortel, Huawei had complete control over the communication systems of Nortel networks. It had stolen all of the interesting technologies of Nortel, including the technology where Nortel Government Solutions sold joint automated booking system of prisoners to the Department of Justice, which meant that by 911 or even before in 1998, or possibly including the Murrah building bomb, Huawei was controlling or could control prisoners out on parole into crime scenes and out of crime scenes. So as long as Huawei kept its nose clean and its head down, it could rely on, I believe, the Five Eyes wide shut syndrome, where the average citizen doesn't even know this service exists. And even experts in the Five Eyes were asleep at the wheel and didn't recognize that they had an intruder. Over to you.
Yeah, I mean, you're raising a lot of really important points, David, because, there are people, one of which we've described a bit, who want to try to poke holes in what we're saying. And that's fine. I actually encourage people to do that because it causes us to, scrutinize our hypotheses even more carefully. But so much of what you're saying, David, it's playing out right before our eyes. It's impossible to deny. I mean, last year, there were a number of different criminals who were released from prison because of fears of COVID-19. Where did they go? What are they doing?
Okay, can you? Yeah, I haven't seen that article. Could you just scroll it up to the top again? Because this is the point that I wish to make. I'm alleging that Pierre Trudeau and Bill Clinton, during the 1980s, when Pierre Trudeau was Prime Minister of Canada, set up a tainted blood racket where blood was taken from prisoners in the Arkansas prison system. It was a toxic cocktail, I guess, because of whatever the sexual habits of the prisoners are. There was a lot of STDs, etc., and the blood was shipped up through a broker in Montreal to a fractionator at Connaught Laboratories, which was affiliated to the University of Toronto, but has now been privatized, I believe, by corrupt agents in the Trudeau administration, to an outfit called Sanofi, which is the world's biggest provider of vaccines.
French
and what I think they were doing,
company.
Yes, and is a member of that SAFE node on the Federal Bridge, which is the group of pharmaceutical companies that's producing vaccines, that is heading for huge profits because they've been producing vaccines that match the production or mutation of viruses through what was originally the Clinton prison blood program.
Now, David, I'm sorry to take you off in two different directions, but something that's just come up that's quite interesting. So right next to this safe bridge, and I know that they're not connected or anything, but just below Entrust is Verizon Business. A lot of people saw my tweet yesterday. I was totally out of commission because when I returned from Washington, D.C., my fiber optic provided by Verizon Fios was down all day. Just a coincidence.
Well, there are no coincidences. I mean, what we know now is that China has been emboldened to say that the Five Eyes will be plucked. If your eyes are plucked out, you don't see. The big question for the survival of the Republic is, when did Huawei get into a position where it could meaningfully blind or pluck out the eyes? I'm saying, or alleging, that it got in that position in 1995, aided and abetted by traitors in Canada, specifically Pierre and Justin Trudeau and John MacDonald, who died in 2019. Pierre Trudeau died in 2000. And a guy called Yves Fortier, who we've talked about. Now, Yves Fortier is a lawyer and a Rhodes Scholar who was a director of Nortel. And I believe that Yves Fortier actually transferred Nortel technology to Huawei. So it's a bizarre thing, one has to struggle as to, has Huawei stolen this technology, or has Canada and its traitors given them the technology? And that's why I believe it's so important that Americans, members of the Five Eyes countries, focus on that RICO charge against Huawei in the Brooklyn court, because I can guarantee you that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, particularly because he's just appointed as Attorney General, is going to try and get that charge against Huawei dropped, because I believe Biden and Kamala Harris are on the side of China in plucking out the eyes of the Five Eyes Alliance and neutralizing it. Over to you.
It's a scary prospect, David. I mean, a lot of people are still debating if Donald Trump's speech last night was a concession or a call to action. The problem that I see is that irrespective of what anyone might think, the political momentum has been so sucked out of the Trump presidency. We've got Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer met just a few hours ago. They're talking about the 25th Amendment. They're talking about impeaching him again. There is a lot of momentum to push Trump out, irrespective of the facts, reality, the law, etc. And it's very troubling. So I agree with you. It's a problematic situation that we're going to get Joe Biden as president. Who is the person that he has announced he intends to appoint as Attorney General?
I think it's a guy called Garland, right? And maybe you could check that. Anyway, so when I saw that announcement today, I did a quick background check on this guy. Yeah, is that his name? Merrick Garland? Okay, very interesting, because Merrick Garland was Associate Deputy Attorney General for Jamie Gorelick. And unfortunately, the short memory of Americans, or most people, is they won't remember that Jamie Gorelick, or Gorelick, I think she prefers for obvious reasons her name to be pronounced Gorelick, was the Attorney General or Deputy Attorney General under Janet Reno. And she was described as the mistress of disaster because she played a fundamental role in poking out the eyes of the Five Eyes countries.
Oh, and he went to Harvard.
Right. And he practiced, I think, in Chicago, but that's by the by.
Yeah, he's from Chicago. Ugh.
Yeah, right. So now Jamie Gorelick, or Gorelick, put in the stovepiping between the CIA and the FBI that prevented them sharing information that should have been supplied by Serco, because the Clinton administration outsourced, I mean, this is how crazy it gets, outsourced the administration of the National Visa Center to Serco in 1994.
And she works for Robert Mueller's law firm, Wilmer Hale.
So you got a group of lawyers, I believe, who have actually helped Huawei and the Chinese make the claim that they're going to poke out the Five Eyes or 10 Eyes of the Five Eyes countries. If the Five Eyes countries, of which I'm a citizen, you know, I was born in Britain, I now have Canadian citizenship. I've worked in Australia, I've worked in New Zealand, and I worked in the United States. I'm not jingoistic, but I do believe the English-speaking peoples have certain legal advantages that maybe other countries don't have, and certainly don't have in China, right? That we have presumption of innocence. And when Jamie Gorelick put in the stovepipe between the CIA and the FBI, those two agencies were unable to warn Americans generally that there were sleeper cells coming in from Dubai where Serco was processing the visa applications. So the muscle hijackers for the 9/11 attack, they got their visas through Serco. Now, it should be very worrying to Americans that, for example, during the Biden-Obama administration, the Defense Red Switch Network phone on the desk in the Oval Office, which has those four buttons, F, O, I, and P, that stands for flash override, instant or immediate, and priority. And what that gives, or would have given, except that Biden managed to get it taken away from the Oval Office desk with that phone, it would give the President of the United States, right, the ability to push the FO button, which is flash override, and he gets patched through, right through to the not the commander-in-chief, the chief of staff, and the heads of the Marine Corps, Army, Navy, and Air Force. That phone, the ICT-2, was taken away from the desk of Obama, presumably because they didn't trust him with access to the Defense Red Switch Network for very legitimate reasons. Unfortunately, now it means that the President of the United States is no longer in instant contact with the heads, the Chief of Staff, and the heads of the Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and Army, because Serco has taken over the operation of the Defense Red Switch network. So if the President of the United States should find the phone, which may be, I don't know, in a basement in the home of the Clintons, right? And he pushed the FO button, flash override. I imagine an operator from Serco says, "Yes, Mr. President, what would you like to do?" Right? And he says, "Well, I'd like to talk to the Marine Corps chief." And the Serco says, "Well, I'm sorry, he's not available. Can I patch you through somewhere else?" So literally, the Clinton administration, aided and abetted by traitors in Canada, has handed off the Five Eyes network, the most secure network that should be, to Huawei. Over to you.
Yeah, David, people in the chat are wondering why they don't include an FU button on this phone. I could use one of those, I think. I need that button on my phone.
Well, they don't need it because Serco has the FU button, right? And if the president of the United States, so God forbid, Biden. So Biden, I believe, aided and abetted the movement of the Defense Red Switch network away from the president of the United States over to Huawei, right? Because that Huawei link would go straight through to all of the patent devices where the applications are processed by Serco, because not only have they outsourced the Defense Red Switch network and the Defense Ammunition Center and the National Visa Center, they've outsourced the administration of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, which is why Wilbur Ross didn't want to talk to you about Serco and the Patent Office. Over to you.
I thought he just really enjoyed space, but who knows? It's a lot of people, David, are feeling now that perhaps many of the people who have been around the president from the beginning have basically been traitors lying in
Correct.
wait. Wilbur Ross could be among them. We saw the president was relying on Mike Pence to challenge the results and, cause the Electoral College certification to go into a kind of a period of scrutiny where evidence could be examined and stuff like that. Didn't happen. Everybody has been really preoccupied with this siege on the Capitol building, and we'll be talking about that in a lot of future shows. Actually, right now, David, people who want to see the full 4-hour and 57-minute video that I shot in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, it's available for sponsors. It's going to be playing later tonight on the Jason Goodman YouTube channel, Crowdsource the Truth 2, Crowdsource the Truth 3. People will be able to watch that totally for free, but if people want to see it right now, they can check that out. And also, you and I are going to be starting our sponsor exclusive show on subscribestar.com/reverse-CSI, patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, and the Crowdsource the Truth sponsor exclusive channels. In just about 30 minutes, we're going to go even more in depth on the topics that you're raising right now. But David, do we have a clear picture of how this type of control over the Five Eyes networks, would it enable China to play a role in what's going on in the United States right now?
Oh, totally. And let me just talk about the extortion network that I believe was set up by Pierre Trudeau and Bill Clinton. And the extorted target, I believe, is always the family. Because if, for example, you can ridicule or bankrupt or jail the father under the 3 strikes program, for example, get the mother, the single mother with multiple children dependent on drugs or alcohol or welfare, administered through the Affordable Care Act, which I believe was introduced by Joe Biden, you can then develop a network of children and young adults in an international pedophile ring of the type allegedly set up by Justin Trudeau and operated by his roommate and best friend, Christopher Charles Ingveldson. So if people need to understand, I'm not inventing anything. I'm just describing the fact that the Prime Minister of Canada was a roommate for 4 years from 1997 to 2001 and best friend of a man by the name of Christopher Charles Ingveldson, who was charged, convicted, and incarcerated as the director of an international pedophile ring during the same period when I believe John McDonnell was equipping the communist Chinese and Huawei with a backdoor into the Federal Bridge. So here's what I think Pierre Trudeau and Bill Clinton and Justin Trudeau developed. I think they developed what I call a child-based virus mutation and delivery service, which could be pointed through young adults or children and international pedophile rings into a target city or a target community to terrify and infect, for example, or cull seniors. And this is what I think is happening. I think the primary virus that was used by the Chinese to attack its own city as a feint or a decoy, Wuhan City, came out of the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg, when that woman was escorted off the premises, but not arrested and never charged, by the RCMP, at a time when it would appear Dr. Cameron Ortis, who's languishing in jail at the moment, courtesy of Justin Trudeau, had discovered that these compromised nodes of young adults or children who had been maliciously or accidentally infected as asymptomatic carriers with a virus, I think he discovered it, and he realized the depth of corruption inside the Trudeau government, and he was preemptively arrested and is now held in jail incommunicado, right, to prevent him from exposing what I describe as the Trudeau child-based virus mutation and delivery service around the world, which is shutting down the Five Eyes. Over to you.
Well, there's been no new information about Cameron Ortis in the past week since our last show, which is kind of consistent with our most recent hypothesis that he has been imprisoned to silence him. I think, David, people are very, upset by what seem like obvious lies. And it's just prolific in the mainstream news now. We've got Bank Info Security telling us that within the last, this is reported in 3 weeks ago, but it's talking about September 2019. That's when they busted Phantom Secure. But this is telling us that the DOJ has seized more of their assets. Nobody's been arrested. I mean, I think a lot of people are now very focused on what's been happening here in the United States, and it's very effective at distracting our attention away from this stuff. I think most people who are watching our show right now, David, are very convinced that these activities at the Capitol building were Antifa and not necessarily what we're being told. BBC is reporting just 3 hours ago that a member of the U.S. Capitol Police has died amid pressure on Trump over inciting violence. This is the story that they want in everybody's mind, that Trump incited this violence. It was a Trump mob. And I don't see it that way. I was there at the president's speech, and he encouraged people to walk over to the Capitol building with him. And myself and the people that I was there with on the lawn, including Charles Ortel, we were quite careful about not wanting to enter into areas that were obviously, not allowed to go. There were other people climbing up the building and breaking windows and breaking in. We hear now it was an armed insurrection is the way they're trying to portray it. A woman who was an Air Force veteran. We know somebody else who's an Air Force veteran. This woman was unfortunately killed. Haven't had a lot of details about that story. There's been no official announcement from the U.S. Capitol Police. When I called their public information officer yesterday, as every single time I've called her, no answer, no response to messages, and no information from members of the public. I asked the U.S. Capitol Police officer who answered the phone if there's any other armed security in the U.S. Capitol building other than the U.S. Capitol Police, and he would not answer that. Another thing that the BBC is doing, David, that I noticed while I was there, they're featuring in this article right here the Confederate flag. Because again, they want the people in the United States and around the world to think that Trump supporters are racist. And without getting into an argument about whether the Confederate flag represents the Civil War or slavery or whatever, I think any thinking person knows that displaying it in public is highly offensive to a large group of people. So if you don't want to appear offensive and if you don't want to stoke the rumors that Trump supporters are racists, bringing a Confederate flag to a Trump rally is a bad idea. And the second I saw it, I thought to myself, I bet you that's an Antifa person walking around with the Confederate flag to give BBC and others the opportunity to do exactly this.
To generate a parallel narrative. And the world's
Right.
leading authority on BBC parallel narratives is Professor Alfred Hermida, who's the director of the School of Journalism up at UBC, who was, in 1997, the founder editor of the BBC online news desk, which is using, it would appear, Trump patented devices from Serco to generate parallel narratives, right? And this is, you see, when you and I have our discussion, we have our wonderful audience that supports us. We're dealing in numbers. Let's say after 4 hours, you and I have been looked at on the show by maybe 10,000. The BBC can produce a live broadcast that 24 hours later reaches an audience of 500 million people in 50 languages, right? So now you're dealing with professional propagandists. So for example, let's say George Floyd, the kneeling death where Derek Chauvin knelt on his neck for 8 minutes, 46 seconds. So there's a white man kneeling on the neck of a guy who'd been 6 times in jail the last time for pointing a gun to a black woman's pregnant black woman's belly. He wasn't a really nice character, right? He was COVID positive. But 2 days later, his death was trumpeted by the BBC in 50 languages to 500 million people. And they coined or drove the slogan Black Lives Matter around the world. So that's what you and I and our listenership is up against, right? And that's why we need to break through their monopoly of access to online audiences running in the millions, right? To something symbolic where the public at large can see this conspiracy that I believe is driven by the consecutive treasons of Pierre Trudeau and Justin Trudeau. We have to break through that conspiracy and explain to people what really happens. So most people didn't know, I think, probably not, that in 1995, McDonald Detweiler built the Entrust backdoor into the Federal Bridge of the Five Eyes network and installed it in Hong Kong, right? In, I think, 6 different languages, probably Mandarin and Cantonese, that gave the Huawei and the Communist Chinese the ability to blind or pluck out the eyes of the Five Eyes countries. So they would stand down in front of attacks, which I allege include the Murrah building bombing, the East African embassy bombings, the USS Cole bombing, the attacks of 9/11, and the insertion of a mutated virus built from blood abstracted from probably dead women in the downtown East Side, the prison system in California, the prison system in Arkansas, and fractionated by Connaught Laboratories, which is now an arm of Sanofi, right? Sanofi is the biggest manufacturer of vaccines. If it can get its hands on a virus that offers the right kind of profile, for example, that could be used with young people and children who have a natural immune system that can then be deployed into a target area to shut down a city like London, or now the entire country is on a lockdown. And incidentally, just as an aside, I wish someone would give Boris Johnson a comb or a brush to do his hair. I mean, it's just, that's totally irrelevant. But there is Boris, glibly, is that the right word, announcing that the country has entered a lockdown. He personally, having been infected by the COVID-19 virus, goes to St. Mary's Hospital, where the pathogens lab is run by Serco. So he came within an ace of going onto a ventilator, which is
David,
not a
many
very nice
people
way to
have
die.
pointed out, sorry to interrupt you, but many people have pointed out that in his most recent video, in addition to looking frankly troubled, he's got this double cross right next to him.
Right. Well, he went to Oxford and he took a degree that would render him, in my opinion, scientifically and technically illiterate. He is not qualified to recognize this infiltration of the Five Eyes defense switch network and all the implications of encryption and so on. Now, you and I have become familiar with this technique. We recognize the infiltrators, and I attribute it very much to the father-son relationship between Pierre Trudeau and Justin Trudeau. I think Justin Trudeau was sent by his father, who's pro-Chinese, somewhere around the 95 period to Vancouver in British Columbia. So the guy becomes a snowboard instructor in winter, leaving him free to do whatever he does in the summer. But it would appear that Justin Trudeau, his roommate, Christopher Charles Ingvaldson, set up an international pedophile ring where children could be infected, or young adults were infected with a virus, and then become asymptomatic carriers into targeted communities. So you start, or they start, by extorting families. For example, in the downtown East Side, which you and I have walked around, right? Putting the fathers in jail or bankrupting them or ridiculing them. The mother is then forced to raise the children by herself, right? And then there's a program by a documentarian coming out from the BBC, which interviewed a number of prostitutes along the highway of tears, if you will, and was asking questions about these women. And they're saying, what is it, when you're in drug shock, you'll pimp your child. Now think, this is J. Edgar Hoover, isn't it, about the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous they cannot believe these. I believe these people have now got a community that allows China to say we can poke out the Five Eyes countries, where compromised nodes, including children and infected young adults, are deployed into target cities to shut down their economies. This is more successful than the 9/11 attack that I believe was staged and masterminded by Huawei. Over to you.
I think you're right, David. This is more successful at destroying the country than 9/11. I mean, they've attacked the office of the President of the United States, and
I just see, if I may interrupt, I see he was caught in 2010 during an international police sting using Facebook, but he was a roommate of Justin Trudeau in 1997. So when did he start running an international pedophile ring? And why wouldn't we believe that he's the patsy and he's gone to jail, leaving Justin Trudeau to operate an international pedophile ring through Childbase as the Prime Minister of Canada? Much more influential, much more capable of undermining the integrity of the Five Eyes Signals Intelligence Network, right? And basically allowing China to threaten what I believe is just short of open warfare, to threaten the Five Eyes countries, right, with having their eyes poked out, which means that the signals intelligence networks of the Five Eyes countries go blind, leaving the Five Eyes countries open to any kind of attack, including bioweapons. That's where they've got now. Let me just back up to...
Wait a second, David, sorry. I've just seen this article for the first time. It says, friends defend teacher facing child porn charges. It's caused me to wonder something else. What if this guy is innocent and he's been set up to take the fall for somebody else?
Like I believe Dr. Cameron Ortis.
That's what I'm saying.
So,
well, maybe
right,
we found...
May I talk about this writ of habeas corpus?
Yeah.
Okay, now the writ of habeas corpus forces, and it's a right, an inalienable right to every citizen of the common law countries, which let's take, and my understanding it's considered to be the crowning glory of Anglo-American common law, and it dates back to the 13th century. it allows you, Jason, for example, if you believe you have a friend, or it doesn't even have to be a friend, someone who's unlawfully detained and very often held incommunicado, and of course in China, they're all incommunicado, including those Muslim prisoners up in northern China, right? You can file, I believe, a writ of habeas corpus, which requires and obliges the custodian or the jailer or the guardian, whatever you like to call them, of, for example, Dr. Cameron Ortis, except that this would be in Canada, to appear before a court with jurisdiction, right? And he has to prove, for example, it might be the people who have custody of Ghislaine Maxwell, who, in my opinion, would be far more valuable to the American people, telling them what was going on with these pedophile networks around Jeffrey Epstein than festering away in jail and offering $20 million to get out on bail. Right?
30.
So, 30 million. In our case, in Canada, we need to hear from Justin Trudeau to prove that Dr. Cameron Ortis is lawfully detained and hasn't been detained because he happens to have discovered a Trudeau child-based virus mutation and delivery network, basically a pedophile network that is delivering asymptomatic young adults or children into target cities such as New York. Over to you.
David, who is this guy, John Iveson, Justin Trudeau's half-brother? Anti-vaxxer, Bitcoin entrepreneur, and affectionate critic of the Prime Minister. This came up when I was searching for a picture of Justin Trudeau with that guy who, it says, some of Krimper's views hover close to the 17th letter of the alphabet, the discredited conspiracy theory that alleges Satan-worshipping pedophiles are doing whatever. He denies his organization, his involvement with the organization. See, that's interesting. See, I have never trusted this movement that surrounds the 17th letter of the alphabet, David, and there's a lot of people with us in the chat today who are talking about your former associate who was extradited to Florida and has been placed under house arrest and removed from the internet permanently. You know, people seem to forget that Field came on this show and said he was going to be spending more time with his wife, who I heard recently, David, sadly has passed away, Field's wife. But he told us he was going to be spending more time with his wife, not doing broadcasts, and that you and I should carry on. And then he double-crossed us, David, because he went around spreading the rumor, which many people are perpetuating even today, that you and I fractured Able Danger. And the reason I'm bringing this up, David, is because I think that things like Able Danger and QAnon, these are things that are designed to attract people, to, get a group around it, supporting it, and then you discredit that thing by either putting Field McConnell in jail or in the case of you and I do believe that me showing up and getting involved wasn't part of whatever that plan might have been, but it threw it off its path to where it had to improvise. And I believe you and I narrowly escaped being tied to some of the screwier things that were going on over there. And now people are still trying to make hay out of that, saying that we did something wrong. Field McConnell is a liar, and anybody who still supports him doesn't have the facts. So I don't want to hear anything more about Field McConnell, but there's all these double crosses happening.
Yes. So these are sandboxes, and you get in and then they destroy your credibility. And this comes under the generic group of extorted families, because obviously Field McConnell has a sister who was the assistant deputy attorney general under Jamie Gorelick. And this new guy, the next attorney general, Merrick Garland, right, is going to be holding the position of attorney general. So I can guarantee you that you're now looking at the United States for something like the mistress of disasters on steroids. I mean, this guy was sufficiently inside the Clinton Department of Justice, right, to become the lead investigator on the Murrah Building bomb, right? And basically, I think those investigations go sideways because the Murrah Building bomb, which was 1995, would be exactly the time when McDonald Detweiler was selling the technology needed to backdoor the Five Eyes network and get them to stand down. So that attack on the Murrah building essentially was a very sophisticated attack. Timothy McVeigh went to jail, and Field McConnell's sister, Christine Marcy, I believe, arranged for Timothy McVeigh to be executed in 2001 because she was afraid he would otherwise reveal the conspiracy that involved poking the eyes of the Five Eyes out in the bombing of the Murrah building. So we have to remember that these are family-level traps, I think often running into multiple generations. But the lead family in the attack on the Five Eyes countries that has resulted in, I believe, the credible claim by China that the Five Eyes countries are going to get their eyes plucked out is Pierre Trudeau, who died in 2000, and Justin Trudeau, who set up and operated, in my opinion, right, a child-based virus mutation and delivery service that has gone global, that is now being pointed at the enemies of China. So I would say the citizens of the Five Eyes countries are at war now with China. And the man who could explain in much greater detail than I'm capable of or you is languishing in jail. His name is Dr. Cameron Ortis. He's an alumnus of UBC, and a habeas corpus writ to bring him, because here we're talking, Jason, not just about cybersecurity, we're talking sovereignty, right, in front of Parliament. So it's not a court in the conventional sense, but a writ of habeas corpus bringing Justin Trudeau and Dr. Cameron Ortis in front of the Canadian Parliament. The challenge is for Justin Trudeau to prove that Dr. Ortis is lawfully detained. I don't think he'll be able to do it. That's potentially the greatest courtroom drama in history. Over to you.
David, doesn't this remind you of the layout of the BBC?
Yes.
It's interesting. We have a lot of people supporting the 17th letter of the alphabet here today. They're going to get blocked. If people don't realize after what happened 2 days ago, what a trap that is, I'm not interested in explaining it to them any further, but the CBC seems remarkably similar to the BBC to me, and this parallel narrative, the most recent news we've had about Cameron Ortis, about how a high-stakes gambler set authorities on the trail of a spy, there's a term in law, David, about something being implausible on its face. To me, that's this. This just seems implausible.
Yeah. Yes, if you go back to the Cameron Ortis thesis, 2006, supervised by Professor Brian Jobe, who was a visiting professor at Nanyang University in Singapore, which is, I believe, one of the grandfathers of this child-based operation. I believe that what he'd done in his thesis, he'd looked backward in time, back to 1995. And in the thesis, and then in his subsequent career with the RCMP, he discovered that the compromised nodes in the Five Eyes countries were controlled through Huawei and were set up to control the people inside the node through a pedophile entrapment and blackmail operation. And I believe all of the world's leaders, remember Starnet was into 60 countries and it was accused of generating hardcore adult and child pornography. I believe all of the world leaders have been targeted either directly or indirectly through this child-based virus mutation and delivery network, including the infection given to Donald Trump, to Gregoire Trudeau, the wife of Justin Trudeau, and Boris Johnson, because Boris Johnson nearly went onto a ventilator. I don't care how courageous you are or whether you can afford a comb to brush your hair or whatever it is. I mean, this guy is the Prime Minister of the UK, and he nearly was put on a ventilator. And I think that's probably one of the most horrible ways to die, because remotely, just like the Dominion voting machines, you can adjust the setting of the ventilator to prolong a very painful death. So these people are justifiably frightened. And I see in the body language, everyone, including Trump, is intimidated by this network. But if you bring Dr. Cameron orders before Parliament, everything, I believe, will be exposed and the whole house of cards collapses. Over to you.
Yeah. David, we have just about 5 minutes left here on our YouTube preview. We're going to be getting into the sponsor exclusive segment on subscribestar.com/reverse-CSI, patreon.com/reverse-CSI storyboards, and Subscribestar and Patreon/crowdsource the truth. I'm going to enjoy that because there's going to be a lot less trolls promoting the 17th letter of the alphabet and incarcerated septuagenarians who were extremely insulting to you and lied about me, and I'm just not interested in hearing about them. People who want to talk about that kind of crap should go to other YouTube channels to talk about it. I do want people to, David, visit your Reverse CSI Scripts website if they'd like to learn more about your research and about you. It's totally free. And people can also keep up with you on Twitter. They can follow you on Twitter at CSI Hawkins. David, you're very close to 1,000 Twitter followers. So hopefully some of the people watching us right now will follow you on Twitter there, and they can communicate with you and stay on top of all the stuff that you're tweeting about. What else would you like to say, David, before we wrap up this introductory segment?
If Biden and Kamala Harris get sworn in on the 20th of January, the Five Eyes will be well and truly plucked.
It's a daunting prospect, David, and I think more and more people are beginning to face the reality that it looks like crime is winning right now. Hopefully something can change before the 20th. But David, we're going to see everybody over on Patreon and Subscribestar. Huge thank you to the generous sponsors that make this and all the shows on Crowdsource the Truth possible. Please make sure you visit David's Patreon or Subscribestar page. Become a sponsor of David as well.